6 days after we buried our parents, my sister signed a contract to sell 210 acres of maple woods and dairy pasture, land she did not own. Not thought she owned. Did not own. The lawyer who caught the signature didn't call the sheriff first. He called me. And he said 5 words I still hear at night: "Bring your mother's letter," and that's the moment this whole thing actually started. I'm Noelle Hartwell, 34, and for 11 winters I kept the books on a Vermont dairy and maple farm my grandfather cleared with a borrowed ox team. I never left. My sister Paige left at 19, and before the funeral, the last time she'd set foot on this land was 4 hours at our father's 60th birthday, 15 years earlier. Our father had a stroke behind the wheel on a frozen February road, driving home alone from an equipment auction 2 towns over. The truck went into a ravine before he ever regained control. Our mother held on for 6 hours at the county hospital. I was the one sitting beside her bed when the monitor went flat. I called Paige from the parking lot at 2 in the morning. Her first question wasn't about either of them. It was whether the house was paid off. A farm like ours doesn't pause for funerals. The cows still needed milking at 5 that morning. I did it before the sun came up. Because grief doesn't excuse you from chores, and because doing the work felt like the only thing I still had control over. You think grief looks like silence. Have you ever watched someone grieve with a measuring tape instead of tears? What would you do if the key to your own front door stopped working the same week you buried both your parents? Paige didn't ask about the will. She assumed it. She stood in our mother's kitchen, wearing our mother's apron, and told me the farm was hers because she was older, like birth order was a deed. It is not. I packed 2 suitcases that night and moved into the sugar house, the one-room building where we used to boil sap every March until the windows fogged white. I unrolled a cot between the evaporator and a workbench my father built before I was born, and I told myself this was temporary. What Paige didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that 7 years earlier our parents had quietly built something that would decide all of this before a single lawyer opened his mouth. Something sealed, something timed, something that started with a number none of us were prepared to hear by the time the official reading was 4 days out. My sister had already tried to sell something she'd never once held a deed to. The funeral happened 2 days after that hospital parking lot call. Half the county showed up at Maplewood Community Chapel, the same building our parents had supported for 20 years. I read the eulogy I'd written at the kitchen table at 4 that morning, and I kept it short. Because that's what you do when your voice can only hold so many sentences before it breaks. You'd think the eldest daughter would want to say something too. She didn't. Paige sat in the front pew and didn't read a word. Her phone buzzed twice during the service, and she didn't silence it either time. Paige moved fast that first week, faster than grief should let anyone move. She let our 2 part-time hands go, Caleb and Soren, 6 seasons each on the sugar bush before the funeral flowers had even wilted on the porch railing. Workers gone overnight. Have you ever watched someone build a future on a number that was never theirs to spend? Her husband Trevor walked our 210 acres with his phone out, pricing fence posts like square footage. He stopped at the maple our father had tapped every spring for 30 straight years and didn't recognize it. He was already calling it the parcel. 2 days later, Trevor showed up at the sugar house with a folded check and a number meant to make me disappear quietly. I told him the land alone was worth 30 times that figure. What he said back made my stomach drop harder than the number ever could. He told me I was just the bookkeeper. He said a lawyer in Burlington had already confirmed Paige inherited everything automatically as the eldest. I asked him to put that lawyer's name in writing. He couldn't, and his voice climbed half an octave the second he realized I'd noticed. While Trevor measured fence lines, our regional creamery manager, a woman named Denise, who'd known our mother for 30 years, called me directly. Paige had phoned the co-op and tried to cancel our standing milk contract before the will was even read. Denise didn't cancel a thing. Your mother built relationships in this county that don't expire just because she did, she told me. 30 years of trust isn't something you inherit in 30 days, and Denise made that clear without ever saying it that bluntly. People always split into two camps when I tell stories like this one. Is loyalty to a parent's documented wishes the same thing as loyalty to a sibling's feelings? I don't think it is. Tell me if you disagree. Then the mailbox handed me something that changed every assumption I'd been making about how slow this fight was going to move. Tucked between a sympathy card and a flyer for snow tire rotation was a letter from a company called Granite Ridge Holdings. It was a letter of intent, $19 million. To build a private condominium access road across the ridge addressed to Paige as owner, signed by Paige on the bottom line. She had signed away land she did not own. On paper. Forever, probate hadn't even opened. What do you call it when someone sells something that was never theirs to sell? In most states, there's a legal word for that, and it isn't inheritance. Our pastor visited the sugar house that weekend too, a kind, anxious man named Mitchell Conroy, who'd baptized me at 11 years old. He didn't come to comfort me. He came because Paige had promised the chapel a generous gift once the estate settled, and he wanted me to step aside quietly for the sake of family peace. Peace had a price. I asked him one question: did he think our parents would want the farm sold to fund private ski condos on the ridge where they were married? He didn't answer. He put his hat back on and left. That night, sweeping under the cot for the third time because my hands needed something to do, I found a cardboard syrup tin shoved behind a loose floorboard, my mother's handwriting on the lid. Inside was an envelope with my name on it. I sat on the sugar house floor and read 4 lines my mother had written in a hand that only shook at the edges, and the last line was the one I couldn't put down. Let the papers speak. You always have. My mother had written that letter knowing exactly how this week would unfold, years before any of us did. She knew her oldest daughter would come home swinging a measuring tape instead of grief, and she protected the daughter who stayed anyway. The reading was 2 days away. What happens when the eldest child finds out, in front of witnesses, exactly how little of the estate she was ever actually owed? The morning of the reading, I dressed the way I always dress for the bank, clean, plain, unimpressive on purpose, and drove past my own front door wearing someone else's brass lock, already bracing for whatever this room was about to take out of my hands or hand back to me. The attorney's office smelled like old paper and wood smoke. Daniel Pruitt had practiced family law in this county for 3 decades, and he greeted me the way he always had, like a client, not a contestant. Denise from the creamery was already seated. So was Arlene Cobb, our mother's closest friend for 30 years. Paige's jaw went tight the second she saw them. "Why are they here?" she asked. Daniel answered without looking up. "They're named in the will." You could feel the room recalibrating around that single sentence, 5 words that told everyone except Paige and Trevor exactly how outmatched they already were. Have you ever watched someone realize, in real time, that the room already knows something they don't? Daniel opened a folder thick enough to make Paige's smile falter before he'd read a single word. Her confidence didn't survive page 2. He explained the estate held 2 separate instruments, not one, and that we would read the smaller of the 2 first. Part 1 left Paige the farmhouse and $240,000 from savings on one condition: live there, maintain it. 6 full years. Or the house reverted to a trust. Paige had spent the week telling half the county she was inheriting $20 million. She had signed away the land for 19, and Part 1 gave her a house with a leaking roof and less than $250,000. The math collapsed instantly. If you've ever watched someone's certainty crumble in real time, you know it doesn't happen all at once. It happens one number at a time. "Where's the rest?" she said. Trevor was already on his feet. "Where's the land? The equipment? There's millions more sitting somewhere." Daniel told them Part 2 would answer that. He reached for a second envelope, heavier than the first, sealed with a notary stamp from a date 7 years earlier. What he read off that single page emptied every bit of color out of my sister's face before he finished the second sentence. Our parents had created an irrevocable family trust the year I turned 27. It held the farmland, the sugaring equipment, mineral rights under the back ridge, and an education fund for rural students. Total value, as of the last assessment, $24.6 million. Not a number. A decision. Paige whispered the figure back like it had personally wronged her. Every family keeps a quiet ledger. Nobody agrees to write down who showed up, who called only when they needed something, who stayed when staying cost something real. Most families never have to read that ledger out loud in a conference room with a notary stamp on it. Mine did. On a Tuesday in March, in front of witnesses who had signed it 7 years before either daughter knew it existed. The trust named a single trustee, lived on the property continuously for at least 6 years, kept verifiable financial records of farm operations, stood in active standing with a regional dairy and maple cooperative. 3 conditions. Paige met exactly 0 of them. 0, not 1. You don't get to claim a role you were never qualified for just because you showed up wearing the right last name. "That's me," she said anyway. "I'm the eldest." Daniel didn't look up from the page. Then he read the name our parents had written into that trust 7 years before any of this happened, and the room went so quiet I could hear the radiator ticking in the hallway. The designated trustee is Noelle Margaret Hartwell, not the favorite, the one who showed up. Trevor's chair scraped back. He stood too fast and said the words that ended whatever partnership he and Paige had walked in with there. Had been a buyer lined up the whole time. A development company planning a private condominium access road across the ridge, and Paige had already signed papers promising it. Daniel told him calmly that admitting to negotiating a sale he had no legal claim to was, depending on the details, fraud. He went pale fast. Arlene spoke for the first time, quiet as a held breath. She and Denise weren't just named in the will. They were the 2 witnesses who'd watched our parents sign the original trust 7 years earlier, the year nobody else in this room had been paying attention. Arlene looked at Paige for a long moment before she spoke again. "Your mother sat across that same table from me and cried while she signed it," she said. "Not because she doubted what she was doing. Because she already knew exactly what this day would feel like for you, and she hated that she couldn't be in the room to soften it. That was the moment I understood the trust wasn't punishment dressed up as paperwork. It was the last conversation our parents never got to have with Paige in person, written down 7 years early because they'd run out of time to say it any other way. What does it feel like to learn the people who knew the truth the whole time were sitting 2 feet away, waiting?" Daniel turned to one final page, a short letter our parents had asked him to read aloud to both daughters together. Written in their own words, never spoken while they were alive. He read that they loved us equally and differently, that Paige's freedom had already been paid for 3 times over, with no strings and no resentment, that mine had been quieter and harder to see, and they wanted to make sure it would still be standing after they weren't. We couldn't say it while we were alive. We can say it now. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. You don't always get the closing line in your own story. Sometimes the room writes it for you, and all you can do is let it stand. Paige didn't cry in that office. She came apart in pieces, the way ice breaks on a pond, not all at once, but in cracks you can hear before you see. She turned on me first, the way people always turn on the nearest target when the real one is a piece of paper signed 7 years ago. You manipulated them, she said. You isolated them out here so nobody else could get close. That part stung. But it wasn't true, and 3 people in that room had personally watched it not be true for 30 years running. Have you ever had your own words handed back to you in a room full of people who finally believed the truth instead of you? I said one thing back to her, the same phrase she'd used on me a week earlier, calling me hired help instead of family. The bookkeeper kept the books, I told her, and the books don't lie. People in the comments will probably split into 2 camps on this one, the ones who think Paige deserved a real second chance no matter what she did that first week, and the ones who think a person's behavior in the 6 days after a funeral tells you everything you'll ever need to know about them. I land somewhere uncomfortable in between, and I'm still not sure that's the right place to stand. Daniel reminded everyone that contesting an irrevocable trust runs expensive and rarely wins. Paige grabbed her coat anyway. At the door she turned back and said, "This isn't over," and for a second I almost believed her, because some part of grief never really is. 3 months later, Paige hadn't moved back into the farmhouse. The 6-year clock our parents set was already ticking down toward a house she didn't want badly enough to actually live in. Distance has a cost. Pastor Conroy stepped down from the chapel board that winter and started sitting in the back pew instead of the front, which told me more than any apology he tried to offer me later ever could. I moved back into the house the week it sat empty. I changed the lock one final time, this time with a key only I carried. The Trust's first scholarships went out that spring to 3 students from 3 different counties who wanted careers in agriculture nobody in their own families understood yet. If you've ever stayed when staying cost you something real and nobody noticed for years, you already know exactly what that envelope felt like in my hands. Paige called once in June. From somewhere I could hear traffic behind her voice, the way I always could. She asked if there was any way to get more out of the trust. I told her the trust was never built to be spent, only carried. She hung up first. I'm not going to pretend this ends clean. It doesn't. My sister is still out there somewhere, still certain the math was unfair, and some nights I wonder if she's right about a piece of it I haven't let myself look at yet. That discomfort is the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. What I know for certain is smaller than a number and heavier than 1, too. Staying isn't a consolation prize for the daughter who didn't leave. It's the only inheritance that was never up for negotiation in the first place. If you've ever been the one who stayed while everyone else got to leave, your inheritance might already be sitting in a drawer somewhere, waiting on a lawyer to read it out loud. like this video if that hit closer than you expected, and subscribe to When Family Revenge Strikes if you want the next story the week it goes up. Some inheritances are written, others are earned, quietly, for years.